Hello, happiness abounder, and welcome back. Today I want to dive the next level deeper on how we can think more positive. So if you haven't heard the other two episodes from this theme week, be sure to go check them out. The first is making sure that you're not gossiping and what my definition of that is. And the second is to watch your inputs. So make sure you check out those episodes 441, 442, and today is 443. And I want to talk about that little negative voice in your head. Now you may be like, yeah, I get it. Think positively. I've heard that a million times, and you've already told me two things to do on how to think more positively. So why are we leaning in on now that negative little voice? Shouldn't, if I stop gossiping and I manage my inputs, shouldn't that stop? Well, yes and no, right? Those things, stopping gossiping and managing and monitoring your inputs, will help significantly. But that little negative voice is still there sometimes. So we need to be thinking about what we can be doing to become aware of that voice, right? It's not like the voice will take on what you're inputting fully. It'll still be a little bit yours. So, first things first, how do we know which voice is the negative voice and which voice is the positive voice? How do we know even where we are at on the spectrum of quote unquote think positively? Because that's the other thing. You could be a fairly positive thinker, but have maybe 2 or 3 thoughts that are negative and go, oh, yeah, I do need to think more positive. And yeah, that's probably true. Everybody could think more positively, but 3 versus like 103, that's a big difference. So I want to talk about that today and really lean into this idea of understanding and identifying and measuring the negative voice in your mind. So, that said, first things first, I want you to think about on a scale of 1 to 10 how often you think negatively versus you think positively. Go ahead, think it through. 1 through 10, 1 being I think more negatively, 10 being I think more positively. Now, I would almost bet money that if you were to monitor your negative and positive thoughts today, based on that scale, even if you put like 7 or 8 in the positive direction, I think you might find you lean a lot more the other way. Now, that is not a bad thing, but there's where we think we are and then where we actually may be. Now, I don't mean to be discouraging in that, but we tend to think, yeah, I need to think more positively. And then when we have to put a number on it, we want to be more positive. And so we put it higher on the positive scale. But if that initial thought was, yes, I do need to think more positively, then you might be a little bit on the lower scale in actual reality. So what I want you to do is to think about that now, and then spend some time today monitoring your thoughts. Now, here's a key component of this. A lot of us, myself included, internally have a tendency to be very sarcastic to ourselves. Now, I'm not naturally the most sarcastic person, so I struggle to come up with examples of this, but even then there's been times where it's like, if I trip, in my head I go, smooth move, Taylor, like sarcastically, like I'm kind of teasing myself. But at the same time, I'm putting myself down. It's negatively slanted. So I need you to start thinking of like, how sarcastic are you to yourself? How often do you put yourself down? Because we also want to like look at negative thoughts as though they relate to other people. And yeah, sure, you can measure those too. But I really want you to dive into the thoughts you have about yourself. And where are they on that scale? So set your baseline of what you think it is. Spend some time today monitoring where you actually are at. That will give us a good baseline in 2 ways. 1, knowing where you're actually at so that you can then measure and see success and evidence of more positive thinking instead of just saying, hey, think more positive. Because that doesn't feel measurable, that doesn't provide us with anything, and we're like, yeah, we should think more positive. And then we beat ourselves up when we don't think we are. When if we have a measurable scale, we can kind of track and see positive growth. Number one. Number two, it gives you an idea of how you may overshoot or undershoot where you are at in your positive and negative thinking. The thought being here that if you can see where you thought you were and where you really were, and it's an improvement, then you can go, okay, well, maybe that was me thinking negatively. And if you can see where you thought you were and where you actually are is lower, then you can go, okay, I was thinking positively. That's a check mark in that, but I have a lot of work to do. Now, how do I do it, right? And that goes back to making sure you're watching, that you're not gossiping. Make sure that you're watching your inputs. And then in the next 2 episodes, I will share more things on how to think more positively. So that's the first part. We need that baseline area. So the next thing is keeping an ear out for it. So again, that's the sarcasm. Is the voice in your head terse and sarcastic and more aggressive? That's how mine is. Sometimes our negative voices can be quiet and reserved in a held back kind of way, because it's like, yeah, it's probably shouldn't have done that, right? And I know I got really quiet right there, but that's kind of what it can feel like and sound like sometimes. But what I'm getting to is you need to have an ear out to determine which voice is yours that's the positive voice and which one's that's the negative voice. For me, and you will have your own way for you, but for me, my positive voice is incredibly encouraging, fairly short and to the point, and very calm and mellow. Whereas my negative voice is very terse, very aggressive, and actually kind of shrill, and will go on and on and on and on and on, finding all the reasons to be negative. So when I do this, where I set my baseline, and I start trying to figure out how many negative thoughts I have, if I can know the difference between the two, hearing it in my own head, I know that sounds weird, but hearing it in my own head, if I can watch for those certain cues, I can know when it's important to listen and when it's important to go, that's a negative thought, we're not going to hear that, and move past it. Because that's another piece of this. By stopping gossiping and by watching your inputs, you may lessen the amount of negative thoughts, but they're not going to go away. So we need to learn how to listen between the two so we can choose to engage with the more positive side of ourselves versus the negative. So I hope that helps. Another thing that you can do to wrap this up is maybe for a day or two, keep 2 separate journals, little notebooks. They don't have to be big things, and have one, maybe one that's black for your negative thoughts, and as you have them, write them down, and maybe one that's another color or white for positive thoughts, and write those down. Just have a very clear, I don't really care what colors you choose, but have a very clear distinction between which book is which, and write down all those thoughts for the day, as many as you can, as they come, because, you know, end of night, you're not going to remember what positive thoughts you had in the morning or negative thoughts you had in the morning, but write them down, and then you'll have a structured list that you can actually see, wow, negative had 10 pages, positive had 1. There's my baseline, right? So something to think about. But I hope this has got you thinking. It's more than how do I think more positively, it's also how do I define what positive thinking is, and how do I keep an ear out for it so I can choose the positive thoughts that I have. So I hope that this resonates. I hope that this helps. Be sure to continue to tune in for the wrap up of this week as we go over what I call the STOP method, as well as a little bit of a discussion about time and grace when it comes to positive thinking. So have a wonderful day. Make sure to listen to those voices and to set your baseline for positive and negative thinking. And above everything else, remember, you are capable of happiness abound.